There are days when faith doesn't shout, it whispers. Days when you wake up and the air feels heavy, when the prayers that once flowed now stumble into silence. You still believe, but it feels distant, fragile, almost dim. It's the kind of faith that doesn't lift you up. It simply keeps you from falling apart. And yet, perhaps that thin thread, that trembling belief, is exactly what's keeping you standing. Maybe you've prayed for something that never seems to arrive. The waiting has lasted longer than your heart thought it could endure. The silence has grown louder than any answer you hoped to hear. And you begin to wonder if God still sees you, if He still cares, if He's still holding what you once placed in His hands. But what if this silence that frightens you is actually the sound of His hands working, not distant but deliberate? Because faith isn't proven in the light, it's refined in the shadows. It's in the quiet spaces, the invisible battles, the moments when your knees touch the ground and you can only whisper, "Lord, I'm trying." That's where heaven leans in. The same hands that formed the mountains still hold the pieces of your tired heart. Faith doesn't fail when it feels weak. It fails when it gives up, but if you're still holding on, even with trembling fingers, that's enough. God doesn't measure the volume of your confidence. He looks at the direction of your surrender. A mustard seed still moves mountains when it rests in the right hands. And sometimes those hands don't pull you out of the fire. They stay with you inside it. Sometimes the storm doesn't stop right away, but your heart learns to rest within it. Because true strength isn't the absence of struggle, it's the presence of someone who doesn't let go, even when your faith does. Maybe the waves are high. Maybe your prayers feel dry. Maybe you've whispered, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." That's not failure. It's faith still alive under the weight of reality. The God who calmed the sea, who walked through the flames, and who restored the fallen hasn't changed His mind about you. He's still near, patient, steady, holding on. So before this message continues, take a deep breath. Let the noise fade. You don't have to prove your faith. Just bring it. Because even when it feels weak, even when it trembles under the weight of waiting, you are still being held. And maybe that's what faith truly is, being held when you can no longer hold on. There are moments when God's silence seems to fill every space. Prayers echo, but don't return. Words run out, and the heart begins to wonder if He still hears. It's a kind of emptiness that doesn't hurt just on the outside, but deep within. It was this feeling that made David cry out, "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever?" Psalm 13:1. Those words weren't born from disbelief, but from longing for the voice of God. But silence is not a sign of absence. It's the setting for refinement. God speaks, yes, but not always in words. Sometimes He answers through time, through growth, through lessons that only waiting can teach. When heaven seems quiet, it's because something is being shaped in the unseen. Gold isn't formed in the noise of the marketplace, but in the silent fire of the furnace. The faith that survives silence is the one that truly takes root. Joseph, forgotten in an unjust prison, had no idea the purpose was still moving. While he waited, God was preparing paths, hearts, and opportunities. Nothing was still, only hidden. And it's the same with you. When it seems God is not speaking, He's adjusting the details of His answer. Silence is a disguised invitation, a call to listen with the heart, not just with the ears. It's in that space that the soul learns to recognize the presence of the one who never left. Because in the end, what brings peace is not explanation, but assurance. The certainty that He is still holding everything together. God doesn't stay silent out of neglect. He stays silent out of love, to teach what noise could never allow you to learn. Every time He withholds a word, something inside you matures. And when faith chooses to trust without hearing, it becomes purer, freer, and stronger. That's what David understood in the same psalm, where he once lamented, "But I have trusted in your mercy, my heart shall rejoice in your salvation." Psalm 13:5. The silence hadn't ended, but the heart had changed. The answer didn't come from outside, it came from within. And that's what God's silence does. It turns absence into encounter, waiting into strength, and doubt into rest. Because silence, in his hands, is never empty. It's a seed. And every seed, sooner or later, breaks through the soil. Not every kind of faith looks like courage. Sometimes it looks like a tired whisper that still says, "Lord, I trust you." It's easy to believe when the heart feels full, but the real test comes when it feels empty. Faith isn't a triumphant shout. It's a stubborn breath in the middle of discouragement. And even if that faith seems small, if it still points to God, it's still alive. Because the value of faith is not in how strong it feels, but in where it looks. Jesus never asked for great faith. He spoke of a mustard seed, something almost invisible. The power wasn't in its size, but in its surrender. A candle trembling in the wind still lights the darkness. So it is with the soul that keeps praying, even when it feels nothing. When the father of the possessed boy cried out, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief," does Mark 9:24, he revealed something profound. Faith and doubt can coexist. Doubt shows the human limit. Faith shows who's still holding on. God didn't reject that man. He met him in the honesty of weakness. The miracle came not because he was strong, but because he looked in the right direction. God doesn't expect perfection. He expects surrender. He moves in sincerity, not in performance. True faith doesn't try to look strong. It simply yields. And in the kingdom, an honest heart is worth more than an unshakable image. It's in that humble confession that grace finds space to work. The strength of faith is not in never falling, but in looking upward after every fall. Even trembling, it still reaches toward God. And that movement, even the smallest one, touches his heart. Heaven doesn't measure faith in decibels, but in direction. Maybe today your faith feels tired, uncertain, almost extinguished. But if it still points to Christ, it's still enough. Jesus himself will not quench a smoldering wick or break a bruised reed. He knows how to handle what's hanging by a thread, because grace specializes in new beginnings. And that's how faith grows. Not when it feels invincible, but when it chooses to stay. When it understands that what matters isn't the strength of the hand that holds, but the steadiness of the hand that sustains. And that hand remains firm, even when yours trembles, preparing your heart for the next step. Fear is subtle. It doesn't always arrive shouting. Sometimes it comes disguised as prudence, as control, as logical thoughts that seem to protect, but in truth, imprison. It convinces the soul to look at the waves instead of looking at Jesus. That's what happened with Peter. He began well, with enough faith to walk on water, but he started to sink when he looked at the wind. Matthew 14:30-31 says, "But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, saying, 'Lord, save me.' And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, 'O you of little faith, why did you doubt?' The same sea that sustained him when he trusted began to swallow him when he feared. The wind didn't change, his focus did. That's the power of fear. It changes the direction of the gaze. It takes the eyes off Christ and turns them toward the problem. And when that happens, the heart begins to sink long before the body does. Yet even then, Jesus doesn't stop reaching out his hand. Peter's mistake didn't push him away. It only revealed Peter's need for his touch. Sometimes fear comes after a season of courage, when everything seemed steady and suddenly something slips out of control. That's when the enemy tries to convince you that faith and fear can't coexist. But they can. The difference is which one you allow to guide your next step. Faith isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to keep going even while trembling. The presence of Jesus changes everything. He didn't remove the wind. He calmed it only after teaching Peter to trust in the midst of it. The miracle wasn't just walking on water, it was learning that even when faith fails, grace doesn't. Fear can shake you, but it can't defeat the one who keeps looking at Christ. And when the soul begins to lose itself in the storm, there's a quiet invitation. Look again. Not at the size of the waves, but at the strength of the hands holding the boat. That's where peace is found, not because the sea stops, but because you remember who commands it. So if today fear is trying to make you sink, remember, Jesus is still close enough to reach you. Even if your faith wavers, he remains steady. The same hand that saved Peter is the one holding you now, and as you choose to keep your eyes on him, fear loses its power to decide your future. God doesn't avoid the fire, he steps into it with us. It's natural for the heart to want to escape pain, to flee from the heat of trials. But there are flames that don't come to destroy, they come to reveal what endures. Faith that is never tested is never strengthened. It's in the heat of adversity that faith stops being theory and becomes life. The prophet Isaiah wrote, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flames scorch you." Isaiah 43:2. This promise doesn't speak of avoiding the fire, but of his presence within it. The same God who allows the furnace is the one who enters it to protect those he loves. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew that kind of presence. They weren't rescued before the fire, but inside it. And when the king looked, he saw a fourth man walking among the flames. Their faith didn't prevent the trial, it revealed the power of a God who turns furnaces into altars. The fire that was meant to destroy instead purified. Maybe your fire has another name: loss, illness, loneliness, uncertainty. But the principle is the same. God doesn't leave when the heat rises. He stays, silent, steady, shaping what still needs to mature. And when the smoke clears, you'll notice that you don't smell of ashes, only of grace. Faith that blooms in the fire learns that not everything that hurts is punishment. Sometimes it's care in disguise. Because fire in divine hands doesn't destroy, it refines. And as you walk through it, something is being formed, a faith that depends not on comfort, but on communion. The fire may be the same, but the outcome changes when God is present. It's in the heat that gold reveals its shine. It's in the middle of pain that the heart learns to depend. True faith is not the one that runs from the fire, but the one that finds beauty even within it. And when you come out on the other side, you'll understand. It wasn't the fire that hurt you. It was God who shaped you. Grace didn't extinguish the flames. It taught you to walk through them, because the same fire that threatens to consume is the one that makes what was asleep begin to bloom. If this reflection is meeting you where you are welcome to stay with us. Subscribe and let these quiet words find you again. Few things test faith like time. Waiting is an invisible exercise where each day looks the same, yet the heart changes within. It's in that space between the promise and its fulfillment that the soul grows weary. Not from lack of faith, but from fatigue. Waiting reveals how much we want to control what only God can guide. Isaiah 40:31 says, "But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Waiting on God doesn't mean standing still. It means continuing to trust while he works. Strength is renewed not when the answer comes, but while remaining on the path. Abraham knew this road well. God promised him a son when the natural time had already passed. Each year without fulfillment felt like another test of patience. But while he waited, God was not silent. He was shaping the faith that would sustain a nation. The delay wasn't neglect, it was preparation. Joseph also lived in the space between the dream and the throne, forgotten, betrayed, tested. What seemed like delay was the plan itself unfolding. And when the time finally came, he understood. Every minute of waiting had matured the heart that would carry the purpose. God is never late. He moves at the exact moment when everything is ready. The seed grows in the dark before breaking through the soil. Growth in silence is the most important kind, because it gives strength when the promise blooms. True faith isn't fed by haste, but by trust. And when the heart grasps this, time stops being the enemy and becomes an ally. Waiting is not wasting time. It's giving time for God to do it right. And while you wait, He's preparing you just as much as He's preparing what He promised. It's in the slowness of divine providence that character is formed, faith deepens, and love is purified. And one day, when what once felt distant finally arrives, you'll look back and see that time was never empty. It was the classroom where you learned how to truly trust. The promise came, but the greater gift was what time did within you. There are days when faith stumbles, days when the heart is tired, the mind doubts, and the soul feels too far gone to try again. It's easy to believe when everything flows. But what about when you fail? When the same mistake repeats, when repentance doesn't seem enough, when shame becomes the loudest sound in the room? It's in those moments that many think God has given up, but that's exactly where grace begins to work. Peter knew that place. He had promised loyalty, but denied Christ Himself 3 times. The weight of guilt drove him back to what he knew: the boat, the sea, the attempt to escape himself. But Jesus found him there, on the shore, without accusation, with only one question: "Do you love me?" John 21:17. The same voice that could have condemned chose instead to restore. Grace works like that. It doesn't erase the story. It writes a new chapter over it. Peter wasn't rejected, he was restarted. His failure didn't cancel the calling, it deepened his understanding. He discovered that the strength of faith isn't in never falling, but in allowing God to lift you again. Maybe you feel like Peter today, tired, ashamed, unsure if there's still room for you in God's plan. But the love of Christ isn't measured by the consistency of your obedience, but by the constancy of His presence. The hand that calls you is not the hand of judgment, it's the hand of a new beginning. Faith that falls and rises again learns something perfect faith never could: the depth of mercy. When everything inside you shouts, "It's over," grace answers, "Not yet." And that "not yet" is the echo of a love that refuses to give up. Every fall can become a turning point if you let forgiveness reach what guilt tried to hide. God never wastes failure. He transforms it into fertile soil for a stronger testimony. The dust of shame becomes the ground where a new faith grows. More sincere, more alive, more humble. And when grace lifts you again, don't look back at the mistake. Look at the hands that raised you. They not only sustain you, they send you again. Because in Christ, no fall is the end. It's simply the place where restoration begins. There are days when the wind blows stronger than the soul can withstand. Fear seeps through the cracks of the heart, and trust seems to slip through your fingers. It was like that for the disciples, when the sea raged and the boat nearly capsized. Jesus was there, but He was asleep. In their panic, they cried out, "Teacher, don't you care that we are perishing?" Mark 4:38. The storm outside only revealed the fear that was already inside. The passage continues, "And He arose and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm." Mark 4:39. The same Jesus who slept amid the waves is the one who commands the sea. His silence isn't indifference, it's authority. He knows the exact moment to act, and sometimes He waits until the heart learns to trust even when everything seems ready to sink. The storm wasn't the problem. It was the stage for the miracle. Fear made them cry out, but it also led them to call upon Him. And when their voice met his presence, chaos turned into calm. That's how God works. He doesn't just quiet the sea, he quiets the heart before it. The sea doesn't always calm right away. Sometimes the wind still blows, but the soul finds a new anchor. The assurance that Jesus is in the boat, and as long as he's there, fear will never have the final word. Faith doesn't erase the waves. It changes how we walk through them. There's a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, and it's only discovered in the middle of storms. It's the peace of knowing that the Christ who calmed the sea is still present in the midst of fear. He never promised the absence of wind, he promised his constant presence. And when fear tries to shout again, remember to look at the one who slept peacefully in the middle of the chaos. He has never lost control, not of the waves, nor of you. True faith doesn't ask, "Why is the wind blowing?" but "Who is with me?" And that answer is enough. Because the boat may rock, but it won't sink when Christ is the captain. And even if the sea rises, his word remains the same. Be still. Not every kind of faith is measured by great victories. Sometimes it's simply revealed in continuing, when the body is tired, when the mind doubts, when the heart no longer feels, and yet you keep going. That's when faith stops being emotion and becomes decision. Perseverance isn't ignoring the weariness, it's choosing to trust in spite of it. Hebrews 10:36 says, "For you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise." The promise isn't just what comes after perseverance, it's what sustains it. Knowing that there's something beyond the pain gives the soul strength to keep walking, even in silence. Mature faith learns to walk slowly. It understands that God's rhythm is different and that haste doesn't produce depth. Like a root that grows downward before it blooms upward, perseverance works in the unseen. It's there, away from the eyes, that real strength is formed. There's a sacred constancy in those who remain. The devil doesn't fear those who start strong. He fears those who finish quietly, in faith. Spiritual endurance isn't loud, it's steady. It keeps believing when no one else understands, keeps praying when no one else listens, keeps trusting when nothing seems to confirm it. This is the faith that sustains marriages, callings, ministries, and hearts. Not the faith that feeds on feelings, but the one that lives on conviction. It doesn't depend on what it sees, but on what it knows. That God is faithful. Even when time stretches long, even when results are slow, even when the soul drags its feet. To persist isn't to insist on your own way. It's to remain in God's way, to remember that He doesn't ask for long strides, only consistency, that He doesn't measure speed, but direction, and that while the world rushes, grace teaches you to walk with the rhythm of eternity. So if weariness has tried to silence your faith, just breathe. It's not failure, it's formation. Every quiet step is a testimony. Every "I'm still here" is a victory. And when you reach the end, you'll see perseverance didn't just lead you to the promise, it shaped you to receive it. What part of this is speaking to you right now? Share a single word in the comments. It may encourage someone else. There are days when the heart longs for silence, strength fades, words feel empty, and even prayer seems to go nowhere. Yet it's precisely in those moments that faith most needs to be spoken, not to convince God, but to remind the soul who it trusts. There's a spiritual power in continuing to declare faith, even when body and mind insist it makes no sense. Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Be taken up and cast into the sea,' and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him." Mark 11:23. He didn't ask us only to think or to wish. He told us to speak. Speaking faith is an act of resistance, a way to keep fear from writing the story. Every word spoken is like a seed that dares to bloom in the desert. A weary soul often mistakes silence for surrender, but God doesn't need shouts to hear, only sincerity. Even if the voice trembles, he hears the heart. A simple sentence, "Lord, I still believe," has the power to rekindle embers that seemed cold. God responds more to the truth of confession than to its volume. The enemy knows this. That's why he tries to silence those who believe. He knows that when faith goes quiet, doubt finds room. But there is strength that rises when the soul refuses to be silent, even exhausted, when it chooses to speak hope in uncertainty, light in darkness, promise in delay. It's the sound of someone standing again, even trembling. To declare faith isn't to deny pain, it's to place pain in the right order, beneath the authority of God. Saying He is good while everything feels dark is one of the most powerful acts of worship. That's when faith stops depending on circumstances and anchors itself in the unchanging character of Christ. That's when heaven recognizes the one who has not given up. Think of Abraham, who looked at his aging body and Sarah's barren womb. Everything shouted, "Impossible," yet he kept declaring the promise. Romans 4:20 says, "He did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God." He didn't rely on what he saw, but on what he heard, and he kept speaking life where there was only silence. Every word of faith is an invisible construction. You might not see results yet, but every time you choose to believe and declare, something is built within you: structure, maturity, hope. And one day, what was spoken through tears will become testimony. So if your voice is weak, speak anyway. Talk to God through the pain. Declare promises in the wilderness. Sing even if your soul weeps. Because faith that speaks while tired is faith that refuses to die. And as long as it speaks, heaven works. There comes a moment when the story unfolds, when what looked like failure begins to shine under the light of grace. Human weakness, when surrendered to God, becomes the stage for His strength. It's there, in places of pain, shame, or loss, that divine power shows its beauty most clearly. Because the gospel was never about winning by ourselves, but about being sustained by a God who wins within us. Paul understood this deeply when he heard God say, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9. He had asked for the thorn to be removed, but God answered with presence. The answer wasn't relief, it was communion. The apostle discovered that victory is not the absence of pain, but the assurance that even wounded, he was being used. That's the divine logic, the opposite of the world's. The world celebrates those who never fall. Heaven celebrates those who rise upheld by grace. God's victory doesn't appear in applause, but in transformation. It's quiet, inward, steady. It's the kind of victory the world rarely notices, but heaven never overlooks. Think of Moses with his faltering speech and history of running away, being called to free an entire people. Or Gideon, hiding in fear, being called mighty warrior by an angel. Or Peter, who denied, wept, and later became a rock of the church. They all had cracks, and it was through those cracks that God shone. The cracked vessel isn't discarded, it's chosen. Because when the light passes through it, it glows from within. It's the symbol of a restored heart, broken enough to let God in, healed enough to let Him flow out. That's why God's victories never come without marks, because those marks tell the story of His faithfulness. Weakness becomes victory when the heart understands it has nothing left to prove, that God's love doesn't depend on performance, but on surrender, that your falls didn't push you away. They only brought you closer to grace. Every pain transformed, every tear gathered, every desperate moment turned into wisdom becomes a trophy of eternity. The faith that once seemed small is now mature. It no longer needs a stage or applause. It simply remains. And remaining when everything pushes you to give up is the purest form of victory. Because true victory doesn't come when the problem ends. It comes when the presence of God becomes enough, even if the problem stays. And one day, when everything makes sense, you'll see it clearly. God didn't use you in spite of your weakness. He used you through it, because it was there, in the cracks, that the light shone brightest. And what once hurt you will be the very thing God uses to heal others. That's the beauty of victory that comes from heaven. Quiet, steadfast, and full of grace. Maybe throughout this video, you've seen yourself in one of these moments. The silence, the fire, the waiting, the fall, the fear, the exhaustion. All of them share one thing, the feeling of holding on to too little to keep going. But if there's something the Holy Spirit wants to remind you today, it's that the strength of faith was never in you. It has always been in God. The faith that once seemed too small to win someday is the same faith that's enough to endure today, because God never asked you to carry the weight of the promise alone. He only invited you to believe, even when everything inside you screams the opposite. The miracle isn't always the sea parting. Sometimes it's the heart that refuses to close. The same Jesus who calmed the wind is the one walking beside you now. The same one who restored Peter, who was with Joseph in the prison, and who walked with the young men in the furnace, is the one holding your hand today. He hasn't changed, and if the storm hasn't yet passed, it's because something is still being formed within you, something time cannot steal. Faith isn't built on moments of victory, but on small daily choices. To trust, to breathe, to try again, to stay. Heaven doesn't measure success in applause, but in endurance. Every tear kept, every whispered prayer, every night you chose to believe a little more, all of it is seen. Nothing is wasted. God is still working in the unseen. He turns silence into preparation, fire into purification, waiting into maturity, fear into dependence, weakness into strength. And when you look back, you'll see that even on your darkest days, there was a light guiding you. Gentle, steady, patient. It's not about the faith that moves mountains in a single moment, but the faith that keeps believing while the mountain still stands. The faith that holds firm, even trembling, that chooses to remain even without understanding, that bows before God, not in defeat but in surrender. So before we close, maybe this is the moment to take a deep breath and say, Lord, I still trust you, not with strength but with sincerity. Because heaven doesn't respond to performance, it responds to surrender. And he always responds. If these words have reached your heart today, remember, you are not alone. There is a God still sustaining what you're struggling to carry. And if your faith feels weak, it's because it's being refined. His power is made perfect right there, in weary hands, in trembling eyes, in a heart that still chooses to stay. One day, you'll see the reason for every silence, and you'll understand that what kept you standing was never the size of your faith, but the size of his faithfulness. Because grace never let go. It simply taught you how to rest. If this brought you peace or clarity today, you are welcome to stay with us. Subscribe and let these quiet reflections keep reaching hearts like yours. Until then, may you rest knowing that even when your faith feels weak, God still holds you.